The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 14th chapter. Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This is the gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. I have often tried to envision the look on Peter's face. Wouldn't that have been fun to see? You know, Peter, for a moment there, is terrified. This is a ghost walking on the water towards us. What are we to do? And then, of course, Jesus says, "It is I. What are you afraid of?" Peter, being the ever-inquisitive one, the one who needs proof, the one who needs evidence, says, "If it is you, command me to walk on the water." Let's be honest here. The last thing Peter expected to hear in response was, "Okay, come on out." I have these visions of his first step, kind of like, maybe? Maybe? Till he finally gets out there. And then there had to be that moment where all of a sudden he was standing there on the water, experiencing his own personal miracle. Talk about excitement. Which was quickly surpassed by the reality that struck his mind, which is, I'm standing on water, and it's storming. At which point he started to sink, and Jesus had to save him. And those words of Jesus, "Why did you doubt?" You can imagine that those words cut right through into Peter's heart. He had just experienced his own personal miracle and then managed to doubt it and let it get away. The old saying, "A penny for your thoughts." I would have loved the opportunity to look at Peter and say, "What are you thinking? What's going through your mind?" It's kind of like that moment that you had it all and let it get away. There are so many angles of this particular gospel. So many things to look at. Faith, trust, acceptance of miracles, acceptance of God's blessings. The ways in which sometimes those blessings are right there in the palm of our hand, and somehow we let human frailty, human doubt, greed get in the way. There is another part to this, and it's an interesting one. It's a question none of us ever ask of ourselves when we read this, or very few do. Would you have stepped out on the water? Would I have stepped out on the water? By the way, I hate swimming. I hate water. I'm like a cat. I'm actually like a rock. You set me in the water and I'm just going to go bloop. There's no treading, there's no swimming, there's no nothing. It's just bloop. Okay? This would have been a stretch, to say the least, for me to step out on the water. But just think about that for a moment. It's not as if Peter grew up in a time and a place where he went to the Y as a child to learn how to swim. And even though he was a fisherman, doesn't mean he knew how to swim. He was called out onto the water by Jesus, and he went. He let it slip away, but he did take that first step. Would we? And what is our call out of the boat onto the water? For some of us, maybe it's obvious. I mean, some of us have had those moments where we've literally changed everything in our lives and started over, and had to show a great deal of faith in order to do it. My path to ministry took a lot of faith on my part, and there were a lot of nights that I sat there looking in a mirror going, what am I doing? Just being honest. Most of us who are in ministry would tell you that. I was a teacher. I had a job in LaSalle Peru High School, teaching social sciences. Enjoyed it. Literally walked away from it to move back to this area, at first to care for my dad, who was sick and in a nursing home. But walking away from a job, knowing you don't have one, is not easy to do. I was able quickly, thankfully, to find a job teaching, actually, at Hoffman Estates High School for a semester, behavioral disorder classes. By the way, prepared me very well for ministry. And then there's that time where, as that semester is coming to an end, my contract is up. I ended up getting a job. My pastor helped me get a job as a youth director in Downers Grove. And the pastor and one or two other people there said, you should really go to seminary. And here's this guy that's pushing 29, 30 years old, who's been a teacher, who's being told you should work in a church and you should go to seminary. It was my moment to step out of the boat. We all know how the story ends, right? I'm here. But it was that moment to step out of the boat, to put behind me everything I knew and literally start all over again. I answered that call. But don't think that there weren't very many nights with doubt. There was doubt, especially when I had to take Hebrew and Greek in seminary. I don't like foreign language. My brain doesn't work that way. So, what is it? When is it that you have been called out of the boat? In various ways, we all have. In various ways, we've all experienced moments where all of a sudden our life got flipped upside down. We suddenly had to start over amidst our doubts, clinging with everything we had to our faith, literally crying out at times, just reaching up, praying that the Lord would just grab our hand. You know, the truth is that we as the church are often called out of the boat. It's very comfy in here, this being our boat. It's easy to sit, listen, talk, smile, sing a little, pray, make our shopping list during the sermon, whatever. But the truth is that our calling is to step out of the boat and out into the world, which can be a scary place. There's a great cartoon out there amongst clergy circles. It doesn't really make it outside of clergy circles, I'll be honest, but it's a really funny one that goes around on the internet back and forth between us clergy, and it's got two pastors standing by a door, and above the door it says, "You are now entering your mission field," and there's this long pile-up of people all standing at the door like this, and the one pastor is going, "What do we do if they don't leave?" You know, that first step out that door with the love and the grace of the gospel to be shared with others is sometimes a scary step. We almost do find ourselves kind of carefully gauging that step. Who is it we can talk to about our faith without feeling embarrassed? Who is it that might judge us? Who is it that if I approach them, they're going to need a ton of help and I'm going to be stuck? Where is it in my life that I'm like one of the prophets and God is calling me into a place where I'm not going to be liked for what I say? This is the reality of faith. Sometimes people will judge us for our faith. Sometimes people will argue with us and tell us you've got it all wrong. Sometimes people that we like will roll their eyes at us. Sometimes we'll meet somebody that needs a lot more help than we were initially willing to give. Sometimes we have to make a stand against groups in our nation or groups in our world. Sometimes we have to be the voice of love and grace and acceptance, even when it's not popular. The part of the story you're not hearing from Charlottesville is that the city is filled with a lot of pastors who have traveled from all over North America. We've known for a while that this was going to happen. There are many pastors who are there, clergy who are there from all different denominations. Many ELCA pastors are there in churches, praying together, out on the streets, trying to talk to those who would preach hatred. And on the periphery, outside of where all the violence is, there are many of my colleagues who are standing on street corners, helping the wounded, praying, holding hands, and even standing outside of church buildings that are African American churches to make sure nobody does anything to that building. Sometimes, when we're called outside the boat, it's to do something a lot bigger than stand on the water. But the message is this: if we answer the call, no matter how scary it gets, no matter how epically we may even fail sometimes, all we have to do is reach up our hand and cry out like Peter, because Jesus is always right there, ready to hold our hand, ready to pull us aboard, and ready to give us our next call. Because he always has faith in us. Thanks be to God. Amen.